hit play, Jackie.
Welcome, everybody. So glad to have all of you here. And for those of you who we can't see, also glad that you are here. What you just heard was some excerpts from Backlight, Meredith Monk's composition that members of the ensemble here at U of O were able to play through Jamulus. And what a treat it was. I'd like to do some quick introductions. Of course, I'm Brian McWhorter, and co-hosting with me today is Sarah Jordan, who is a member of Da Capo. We also have Steve Vacchi on bassoon, Melissa Pena, oboe, Steve Polagy, cello, Alexander Docine, piano, Allison Sniffin, who works with Meredith on these scores, and of course our guest and most special guest and soup technician, Meredith Monk. Welcome, everybody. So glad you're here. Oh, and I missed Jackie Cordova Arrington, who has basically arranged this entire week. We are so grateful for all of Jackie's efforts. So thank you, everyone, and welcome. Let's start off by talking about Backlight. This is to Meredith and to Allison. Can you tell us a little bit about this piece, how it came to be, and the process of creating it?
I'll start, and I just realized that I had a little score that I was going to show you, which now I don't know where. I'm going to have to find it when Allison is talking. But I keep a music notebook all the time, and so it's fragments and sketches of material over the years. And when I started thinking about an instrumental piece, I took out a notebook, and I saw that I had worked on some material that I called Detective A and Detective B, which I want to show that to you, which, while Allison's talking, I'll see if I can find it. And somehow it just felt like it would be a very intriguing piece of material to start from with an instrumental ensemble. And so I started working at the piano on that, and then trying to determine what the instrumentation was going to be. And as I was working on it, I started, for some reason, film noir came up to me. And I was starting to think about, and where Backlight comes from is the way that film noir is always lit from the back. You always get like halo over the images. And so that seemed like a very interesting thing to work with musically, in terms of resonance and shadow and light. So I just took it from there. I can show you my little notation from the second movement, which I call high descending. So that's just, and you can see the little piano figure there. Alex, see there's that little blue.
Can you put it closer to the camera?
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
So, the way that I work is I always work either at the piano or vocally. And, I was just thinking this morning about how in the string quartet that I wrote for Kronos, I literally sang through the last movement. I laid tracks, and I got my overall form with my voice. And sometimes that ends up being the most successful rather than being at the piano, but it's either one or the other. And then what I usually do is I record these fragments or phrases or even long passages, send them on to Allison. It's a little bit like going from Mars to Earth. So Allison somehow transcribes them and puts them into a score form so that people can actually work with them. And she knows me so well that she knows that if I've made a mistake on the piano, that was not my intention. But we have a collaboration that's been going on for so many years, plus the fact that Allison sings as a member of the ensemble and plays. And I usually really, when I'm working instrumentally, I like to work with Allison because she does come from a background. First of all, she's a multi-instrumentalist. She plays piano, horn, and violin, as well as singing. I feel that she understands the techniques of the instruments. I did study a little bit of orchestration with Kirk Nurok and did little studies of the different families, but I feel that she also knows how to translate those principles onto paper, which is very hard for me for a number of reasons. My eye problems, and I just can't line up vertically that well. And so I'm just so grateful to Allison. And then we orchestrate together, and mostly we really work together on the orchestration, which was a lot of fun. So Allison, if you want to talk, I'll run and see if I can get Detective A and Detective B.
Yeah, I'm so curious, Allison, can you talk about just what stage in the process you come in and what your experience is with this kind of thing?
Well, Meredith, a lot of times she sends me audios that she puts together on a 4 or an 8-track recorder, or like a few measures of something that she's written out. And when I get the audio, I have to make decisions about the notation, and a lot of time we're on the same page, and sometimes we're not. She says, "I've heard that as a 4, and I heard it as a 3 or something." But
so you're
we figure it out together.
That's always really interesting, because you know how that happened with another musician friend of mine. That, for example, we went to I remember we were just having fun going to a Cuban percussion class, and we were, so we were playing, but we heard the phrases. It was like a mirror image. She heard the downbeat one place, I heard it the opposite. So sometimes that happens. You just you're perceiving, but the way you're analyzing is different. I'd send something like this to Allison. So there's detect. So that's the first movement. Detect. That's the first, what I call the A, and this is the B where it modulates. So, it's pretty scribbly, but sometimes sending the sound files plus, a little notation like that is helpful for Allison, because then she can get her bearings in terms of at least how I was thinking of it.
Right.
And so, but you're also in some ways transcribing, if not music itself from these recordings, intent from these recordings.
I think so. Yeah. It's like, it's like translating too.
As I said, Mars to Earth.
It seems like that, but
Because
Allison, you
some
seem
of the
so
stuff
calm.
is so complex. Some of the vocal stuff is so complicated, and probably should never be notated.
Well, and so that's my next question. How does this process work? How is it different between instrumental compositions and vocal compositions?
I think. Go ahead, Ellie. I'm sorry. Excuse me. Go ahead.
Well, a lot of the vocal, the way Meredith sings is very imprecise, like the effects, and you have to find a notation for them. And
they're precise they're intentionally precise, but it's between the cracks.
Pitch-wise, imprecise. Yeah. So you have to figure out what's too much to say in the score, and we kind of developed a system over the years of transcribing an audio that Meredith likes to the best of my ability, and then saying, you're free, as long as you understand the principles, you're free to do this, to extemporize on it. I was thinking about the shattered glass, Meredith, in your piano piece your piece for 2 pianos.
Mm-hmm.
And I put to get that, I put it through the amazing slow downer software, which so I could get all of those little pitches, and then so the pianist has something to work with, but then they can sort of see what the harmonic world of that is, and how fast the notes are going, and then make up something from there.
I find this transfixing. I mean, it seems so interesting. Meredith,
But I wanted to say that sometimes I think that some of my best work can't be notated. So,
Right.
for example, the last section of Atlas, my opera, it's a piece called Return to Earth. And I work with my singers in a different way than I do instrumentalists, because usually with instrumentalists, I don't get the kind of rehearsal time that I get with my singers. You know, it's labor intensive with my singers. And I don't like to really work, you know, I don't like to work on the page. So for example, right now, Allison and I are working very hard on sections of Indra's Net, which were the sections that we're working on are the big instrumental choral kinds of pieces. But some of the vocal work, I just do not want to put it on paper. I actually don't want to do it. I feel that it will really get in the way of this thing coming to life. Because it's true, what Allison calls imprecise, I feel like it's not, doesn't have to do with precision. It just has to do with maybe microtonal kind of ways of using the voice, you know, that we don't have in our notation system.
Yeah, that's
so
what
it's
I meant.
sort of, maybe it's less imprecise and maybe more non-reducible to
That's right.
music.
Because I remember one time, Allison, I don't know, Allie, if you remember this, but there was one thing where you were trying to put in a rhythmic thing. I can't even remember from what piece. And the computer, it just was like, I'm not doing this. I mean, it was like 1/600th over, you know, like, I mean, that was the time signature. I mean, it just wouldn't do it. So then, and some of also the vocal textures that I'm working on, sometimes Allison has to figure out a way of almost doing it by hand, like in a score. Like for example, in Backlight, what I call the the vocal gesture, the thing for the clarinet, and I can't remember the other instrument at that point. I think it's a flute in the clarinet. You know, that there's like those, and what pitch is that exactly? You know, how do you actually notate that? So that, you know, there's a pitch area that I want it to be, but it's not, I'm not going to notate every microtone in there. And I can't remember, how did we solve that, Allison, in the score?
I think you sang it to the players, and the bass clarinet at that, he did kind of imitated you.
Yeah.
In the rehearsal.
Yeah.
And then the notes go in the score.
So maybe there's like a little asterisk in the score that says "See Meredith."
Well, we have a lot of asterisks in our score.
Right.
But I think the point I want to make about the Return to Earth is that, so that's a very complex vocal piece, and with a lot of crossfading as one of the principles, and a lot of counterpoint. You know, Allison, I think we had 3 different ways of, we did like a vertical map, because you don't want to count out every phrase. It would make you crazy as a singer to count out how many's. You know, it's more like Balinese music, you know, where you start cooking and then the leader nods and you move to the next section. It has more that quality, instead of counting 25, 26 of these repeats, because, you know, it would just make you crazy. So we did a vertical map, we did a horizontal map, and then we did a transcription of one performance. And still, when we were working with a chorus of wonderful French singers, they came to New York and they still did not have the piece. I mean, it was like we had to still teach it to them. And I think it's one of my best pieces. You know, sometimes I think my best pieces are the ones that cannot be notated, because it's between the notes and it's underlying the bar lines. It's what goes on underneath the notes that's really happening.
So Meredith, if I can just interject here, it was very interesting, this notion of notation, and I'm always very interested in that. And it looks like the way you approach it is a little bit on the like in Baroque, where the
Oh,
performances happened in the spot and they didn't have performers per se, right? So the composer would perform or would work with the performers right away.
oh,
And later on in the Romantic period, of course, then the notion of the performer appeared, and then composers became more precise in the notation, because people would be playing the pieces and without knowing the composer, right? Now that we have these internet possibilities, I wonder if you considered having like a database where for specific things like that moment with the clarinet that you showed your player what you heard. But for people who don't have the chance to work directly with you, maybe then they could go to the internet and you had some clips where you show what you meant. I don't know. I'm just
it's
curious.
fascinating,
Yeah.
Alex. I
Yeah.
love that about the Baroque music. I think I was somewhat
Yeah.
aware of it, but you really articulated that in such a beautiful way. I love that because it is that's very close. We've definitely thought about doing that. I mean, we'd have to really organize it. And with Boosey and Hawkes, like sometimes with, they're my publishers, sometimes I try to insist that if somebody wants to play the music, that they will listen to at least a recording of it. That we do, it's not isolated into this, this section, here's what the technique is. But I think that's a great idea, to do that. But at least that people listen to a good performance of it, so you can kind of get an idea of the area that I'm working with instead, and not take that as the gospel truth, but that is what I was going for. But sometimes people do not, it's so strange, Alex, like sometimes people don't want to take the time. They just want to read it off the page and they don't take the time to listen to, here's a prototype, not that you have to follow it exactly, but here is the sounds that I'm looking for. But sometimes people resist that. Do you know why that would be? Anybody?
Well, I have I'll venture out here. I think that somehow the conservatory training, I won't mention the J school, but the conservatory training is such that we're trained to look at it like it's the gospel truth. We're trained to look at the page like that's all the information you need. And when we get semi-ambiguously notated pieces, it can be quite alienating for some people, I think, who are hoping to get all the information that they need from that page, which is why I find this really interesting, what Allison and you, Meredith, do to kind of bridge that gap between something of the oral tradition and music notation. Seems very tricky.
It's very tricky, but we love working together. I'm so blessed to work with Allison. And in terms of the the vocal pieces, as I say, I work you could say my more body oriented way, and usually can make my forms that way. But the instrumental pieces, I don't think that I could really achieve them without her help and her knowledge.
So
or
Allison,
they wouldn't be as alive, let's put it that way. So we just have, over the years, and I have so much respect for Allison. She's a magnificent musician, period. Basta, really.
So Allison, beyond the clarinet bit that you were talking about, what other kinds of challenges came up with Backlight in particular with notation?
Oh, Meredith, this whole second movement is very, very trebly. It's these descending lines, it's descending from the sky kind of. And we knew what instruments we had to work with. And it was how to choose the right colors for that, I think. Bassoon at the top of his range, and and flute often at the lower part of her range, and then make it all sound gorgeous,
And I think
people playing in unusual parts of the range.
Because I think I'm trying to work with that idea that I have worked with the voice over the years, of just trying to find other ways of producing sound. And sometimes it's more challenging with instruments because it seems like each voice is so different from the next voice that it's, that in a way you could say it's a more idiosyncratic instrument. But with and I'm sure that, when you're a violinist, every violin is so different, and you can hear one person playing the violin and another person, and you would know the difference, 1, 2, 3. But I think our voices are a little bit more idiosyncratic. So I've always thought of the voices as instruments in my work right from the beginning, when I had a revelation in the mid 60s about my voice. So I've always thought of my voice as an instrument. But when I started working with my first orchestra piece, I tried to think of the instruments as voices. So exploring what are the unusual sounds that an instrument can make, not like, somebody like Berio and that whole school of thought, because they did explore all these extended techniques. I mean, it's not just for the sake of the extended techniques, but it's more how to get a different kind of sonic world. And so Allison and I on Backlight, we tried to really have the instruments play in a register that you don't usually hear. And I'm very curious to ask Steve, who's a cellist, what was uncomfortable about the cello part, because we really worked very intimately with the cellist in the ACJW, and she never said that it was uncomfortable for her. So I'm just kind of curious, is it a range thing? Is it an impulse? But what made that uncomfortable for you?
The difficulty in that one passage was jamming in that grace note, which also happens with, which happens with concurrently with the string crossing. I mean, it's fine. I wasn't making a serious complaint. Dvorak Cello Concerto, which we've all played many times, has a few uncomfortable spots technically in it too. So it's okay that you have that. But there was just a few little things like that.
That's very interesting. Yeah, good. I'm glad to know that. Thank you.
But a good professional cellist can play that, and they shouldn't complain about it.
And I think in that passage I was trying for almost a folk kind of quality a little bit in the cello. More like a fiddle, fiddle quality, that more folk quality. So maybe that roughness is, that challenge gives it more of that quality also.
Actually, the hardest thing for me about that passage was that over Jamulus, I wasn't hearing enough of Alex. Alex is nice and loud in my headset, except when I'm playing. And then, if I lose his pulse for a moment, I'm guessing a little bit. So
what we do with the Jamulus when we have that problem is you turn yourself down so that you're hearing Alex more. I mean, the concert that we're going to do on Sunday, I mean, this is the first time that we've done a Jamulus live. Wow. And we had to go, because the anthem, we did a few takes of it, with alarm will sound. So we chose the best take and then picked up the pieces afterwards, if there were things that were off. This is going to be, we are vulnerable. But the joy of singing with Allison and Katie again, with this repertoire that we haven't done in a year, is well worth the, incredible technical challenges about it. But what we found was we went through the repertoire, and some things they were not singable in the Jamulus situation to be able to stay together. And what we've been finding with Daniel, our engineer, says you have to have a schizophonic way of performing, because, for example, if I'm doing we have these Cellular Songs a cappella trios, and if I'm doing what we would call the basic track, which is the first thing that you hear, and Allison and Katie are working against that, I cannot really listen to them, because if I really listen to their rhythm, I have to just know they're there, but I have to have one ear totally involved with me keeping the pulse and going forward as if I were a kind of metronome, and just praying that if the fact that they sound a little delayed to me is not what people hear. Because if I start listening to them and going with them, the whole thing slows down. It's so crazy. It's like on one hand you have to be in your own track, and on the other hand you're listening, of course, for intonation and trying to sing heart to heart with your colleagues. But it's kind of a wild situation.
Well, we're talking about Jamulus. This is the technology that was employed to facilitate simultaneous performance, real-time performance from the ensemble over the virtual Zoom sky. Wait. Anyway, so I'm curious, and I don't want to out myself as being anti-viola, but I did neglect to introduce
Never.
our violist, Arnaud Guillabert, and Arnaud, hi, and my apologies. I do have some issues with viola, but we'll table that for
Oh,
another discussion.
never.
It's nothing really personal, but it's just archetypal.
You sure you really want to go there, Brian?
Not one more viola joke, please.
So, Arnaud, what was your experience with Jamulus? What did you feel like with maybe particularly the latency issue?
Well, actually, we did a blind. Well, actually, blind is a great word because you can't see each other when you play through Jamulus, and to me that was actually one of the most exciting features. And the first time we did this test, it was only with Jackie on the flute and Steve Vaki on the bassoon, and it came to me as very playful. And I really enjoy doing this also because lately I've been doing a lot of performing with strings only. I've been lucky enough to be able to do that. And so hearing woodwind instruments again after such a long time was pretty fantastic. And I didn't really experience the latency issue too much. I thought it worked out very well. So yeah.
I'm very interested because when we did Anthem, we did not, we were seeing each other as well. So we did not do just an audio. That's interesting. I mean, I think that would also be very interesting to work with, just not seeing an image at all. But what we did was we used one device for the Jamulus and then used another one for the video. And that also had its built-in problems because if I was looking with the other singers to get cueing, there was a delay. So you had to just, try to sing with the person because it is really nice to, as singers, it's nice to see the other singers, but not look at their mouths as a cueing device for rhythm.
Yeah, and we actually tried to play some parts of the piece together without a click, and we really had to absolutely rely on each other because we were playing exactly the same values. There was no internal subdivision, and that was also one big challenge, but that was also a big part of the fun too.
Wow.
Oh.
So
yeah, the third movement was Alex's track because I could just keep my metronome going there.
That's right, Alex.
Yeah, so with the piano on the third movement, that kind of worked. Yeah, but the other ones were harder.
So Juan Kim, who I guess I also neglected to introduce, and I'm just going to go over there after to ask this question and sulk. Juan, my apologies, but let me ask you this question. We've all been missing playing with other human beings in this last year. Did Jamulus satisfy that want for you?
Thank you, Brian. Thank you very much. Well, the initial, of course, kidding. The initial experience, I think, I mean, that was really the first thing for me. Like when we first tried it, it was pretty miraculous. Like the fact that we could actually play real time. I mean, the latency from the data I saw is microseconds. So I mean, our ears can't really catch that much difference quickly. So it was really exciting. And then as we kind of try to build upon, so add more musical layers, that's when it became really troublesome. I mean, our goal initially was try to stay together, really. I mean, survival mode. And that kind of works if you're really careful, pay attention. But then we try to do other things on top of that. There are many technical difficulties. Like we're all playing from different space to different microphone setting. There's a volume adjustments, almost like a post-production level. So, the nice thing about chamber music is that we interact very intimately, the way that we produce our sound, our dynamic, and that triggers each other's. That part was greatly missing because, again, we could literally turn somebody else down and turn up. So I would turn down the viola. No, but there's that's very important aspect of playing. And of course, I think another issue is just the group size and just amount of data that's being computed that created a great deal of static. And that actually even hindered our effort to stay together because it was very difficult to hear each other when the texture became really thick. as far as not being able to sing each other, I mean, that's actually one thing. It's in a very high level chamber music playing that I try to aspire. Like, you know, string quartets try to play without looking at each other, just turn around, you know, in a reverse circle. And when you're really kind of intimate, you can do that. That's actually, I think, better for an ensemble almost, not being able to sing, solely rely. The fact that this is a new music we've never played, except for Jackie, that's not always the ideal place. So I feel like we have a simpler, textured, you know, music that we're really familiar with. I think we can overcome a good deal of that missing visual part because we are very familiar with the music, and then we can do them together. So yes, I think that's sort of my experience. My favorite time was when there was a really simpler lines. Like for example, there's a unison clarinet oboe in the second movement.
Yes.
At first, because I mean I should have been looking at the score, but I think, you know, I came in maybe a bit late, so I and Melissa were exactly a quarter note apart, and we just kept on playing in perfect a quarter note apart, and then realized that should be unison. So we did a few more times afterwards, but each time I could literally, I don't know, hope Melissa feels the same way. Maybe it's just me, but I felt like a real interaction. Like I do some phrasing thing, and Melissa, like I had that's really kind of exciting. But to that at a global, you know, scale with the full ensemble was almost impossible because of all of the technical hurdles.
You know, when we were recording Anthem with Alarm Will Sound, the thing that what we also had that same experience, like, oh my gosh, it's so wonderful to be singing and playing together. But with that situation, because it was going to be post-production and it was going to be done as, you know, not live in real time, but it was in real time playing together, but then we were going to be able to mix it down and everything. The thing that I did notice that was really beautiful was, I think we did 3 takes of it, and there was one take that was like the magic tape. You know, the thing that was so beautiful was that energy, you could tell the difference between that energy of, you know, one take and another, which is what making music is about. And so that still we were able to achieve that. In that
And you felt that in
situation,
real time?
and we felt that in real time. I knew which take it was. I knew which was the magic take. I knew it in real time. So that was beautiful. But then we did, you know, and I was saying last night to Brian that the thing that we're missing is what Daniel, my engineer, and I did was, and Allison also worked with me on this as well. We really created the space of the piece. The thing that was a little tricky with that was that we did a beautiful, I think, a beautiful audio version of it. And then when we saw the video component, which was just the kind of Zoom thing where you saw the instrumentalist playing and the singer singing, and they edited that, you know. What didn't work is, for example, there was a section where the trombone came in, but it wasn't loud enough in our mix to, you know, to really to be believable that the trombone was playing and you were seeing him on the screen. So we did a beautiful audio mix that I think is the superior mix, but then we had to remix after we saw the video to, okay, at that place, we have to bring the trombone up to match the picture in a way. We had to do 2 different mixes.
And to do, the reason perhaps is to bring the listener into that space.
Yes,
or
bring
the
the
viewer
listener
into that
space,
space.
because if you didn't hear the trombone at that certain point, it didn't make sense that you were seeing him close up and that you didn't hear the trombone in the ensemble.
Right.
As much as, you know, it seemed visually. So that was a strange kind of juxtaposition as well.
Okay, so Steve Vaki, all of this sounds overwhelming to me. We're talking about
It is.
a technology that is somewhat limited, but also affords a certain kind of benefit, and also this notation style that for some of us might be on the ambiguous side, and I mean that in the most polite way. It wasn't overwhelming for you.
No, next question.
Okay, so.
Right on, Steve. Yeah, really. Thank you.
No, honestly, in terms of notation, I didn't have anything outside of what you might see in traditional Western classical writing.
Yeah.
I didn't have any of these kind of vocal shapes. I saw them in the score, and I certainly heard them from my colleagues. And I'm completely familiar with this. I've played a lot of music that fits in the spaces in between, if that's way we were describing it earlier. But no, for me it was some registral things. So as both Meredith and Allison mentioned, especially the second movement, it is very treble. The bassoon is up quite high, and that's
You're
fine.
thinking of the Rite of Spring.
I know it wasn't even that high.
You know, it's like the bassoon in the upper range is so beautiful. So, you know, I do want to point out, and Jackie certainly knows this, I worked really closely with the musicians in ACJW. So I worked really closely with, I called him Michael Bassoon. We had Michael Piano and Michael Bassoon. So I really worked hard with Michael Bassoon to make sure that it was doable. You know, it's like it was really a very organic process before that's going to be passed on to other players. And that was very, very satisfying, you know, with all the instrumentalists of the ACJW. And
Well,
I wanted to make a beautiful bassoon part. And I have to say, I'm not allowed to say this, but I do love the bassoon part in Backlight. Or the bass, every time the bassoon comes in, it's like, oh.
Yeah, you're talking about Mike Hartley, is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, he's a great player.
Yes.
Well, I loved listening to these little snippets, and it just makes me want to hear more. I'm eager to hear more. Meredith, let me ask you a question. In the New York Times review of Backlight's premiere, it stated that you had originally planned to add a vocalist to the ensemble, but then later decided to keep the work instrumental. Can you talk about that decision?
I think I wrote that also in my notes, my composer's notes for the score. I can't remember that now exactly. It's so many years ago. I think probably I realized that, again, let's really try to play with instruments as voices in this piece. You know, it's like a, you know, in a way, to have a singer wouldn't be as risky for me. So I wanted to risk having a you know, totally an instrumental piece.
Mm-hmm. And then in terms of, and maybe this is a question for Jackie or you, when are we going to be able to hear all of this piece?
I think it's
Well,
Jackie.
Yeah, sure. So actually, it's so funny, Brian, that you mentioned that. I just put a note down in the chat for everybody that's tuning in. If you would love to hear performance of this piece, let us know. We don't have a date slated for that at all, but definitely I think it's something, you know, at least I'd be interested in doing in the future. Maybe we can, when we can all get together in person and play together. So, because it's an absolutely fantastic work, Meredith, and I just wanted to say thank you so much. I think there are two things that I really loved about this piece and the process. The one being that, you know, as an artist and as a musician, I am absolutely obsessed with color and timbre. And so I feel like when you listen to the second movement of this piece, you like hear all of the colors and timbres, especially of the, like, you know, woodwinds, the upper woodwinds, kind of become one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that we sort of like aspire in orchestral playing and in chamber music. And when I was playing with my colleagues, you know, Steve, Vaki, Melissa, Juan, and I, we play together in the UO faculty woodwind quintet. It was so cool to hear that sound, unified group sound, come out. And I think that's what's wildly special. And then I also wanted to say, as being a person that was involved in the premiere of the work, you know, Brian, you were talking the other day that that you used to be, what did you call it? Is a contemporary music nerd, or what was it?
New music nerd.
New music nerd.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I don't identify that way at all, even though I love new music. I have always felt a little bit outside of that culture a little bit. But what I really loved about this piece and what I continue to enjoy about it is that it's just there's so many different entry points for people to have buy-in to it. And it's such an incredible work that even if you're not in the cool kind of new music nerd group, you know, it's something that you can feel like you're a part of and really experience it. So yeah, I just love that. And thank you so much, Meredith.
Well, thank you so much, Jackie. I mean, I'll never forget that process. It was just so joyous of working with you, all you instrumentalists. And I think Backlight, I mean, it really, you know, if I was going to critique what I heard, like second movement, for example, that you were talking about, I would just take my time a little bit more with it. I think it's a little bit fast. you know, the pull of those woodwinds. Because I do remember when Allison and I were talking about instrumentation. Oh, I really want it to be like the breath. You know, I really want it to be woodwinds, all woodwinds blown, because to get that kind of sustained breath feeling. So if anything, I would say is try it when you're rehearsing. Just try a tiny bit slower so you get that very mysterioso feeling about it. Because I think the first two movements are about mystery. And sometimes I think, I mean, this is my vulnerability as a composer, because when I listen to my work again, I've got to, you know, like, well, you know, beautiful, but I think it's missing a movement between the second and the third movement, but it doesn't matter. I mean, it can be played now, but maybe everybody's work is always a work in progress. If I get another movement together, I'll send it to you right away, Jackie, I promise.
Sure, I want to. Actually, Brian, I hope you don't mind. I have a quick question for Meredith. Meredith, I'm kind of curious. Do you often see many of your works as a work in progress? Or are you open to that, or are most of your works sort of closed and finished?
Well, some I think have I kind of sense their like inevitability, like some pieces, and I feel like even though there might, as you know, as a live performer, how beautiful it is to play something many times, and it develops. You get a deeper understanding of it, and so it's a very organic. It's alive. It's an entity. That's the beautiful thing about live performance. I think that some pieces, you know, feel that they are really, you know, as I say, it's an inevitable form, or it has a wholeness. And some pieces, when I listen again, I love what I'm hearing, but I feel like, well, as I say, you know, maybe, I'm not sure about this, but maybe this could have another movement in between. I'm not sure that's a solution, but I feel that emotionally, the first two movements have this kind of tension. And I was thinking that the third movement was a release, but I think it needs something in between to make it that you can actually, because it's such a big harmonic shift, that maybe you need to have some little section in between where it's kind of almost a mix of those two modalities. And then, you know, then you really can get that open quality of the last movement. But that's just listening to it after a long time. Maybe I'll listen to it again and not think the same thing. But I think that mostly I know the difference between something that I would like to maybe rework and something that I feel it is what it is, and that's it, the form.
And also, if I could quickly have a question to Meredith, because one of the things that really caught the many things that caught my attention, Backlight, was the ending of the third movement. Mm-hmm. And it was really something that I never experienced before. And unfortunately, I don't think we have a clip of that. But can you tell us what were you thinking in terms of did you want that to keep going on our imagination, or because it's a very interesting ending?
Well, you know, Alex, I think again, listening to it again, I think I would probably even repeat the phrases more, you know, maybe a number of more times before it just stops, so that you know, maybe like too much, you know, maybe it needs to be repeated where you just, I can't listen to this one more time and it's over. You know, it has something to do with time duration, and yes, the sense that that's going to be ongoing. Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, because that's how it felt. It was very interesting, that feeling that you're playing as a player and also as a listener. The first time I heard it, I mean, it's really interesting kind of feeling to have that sort of ending. So I'm just
and
very
I feel
curious.
The beginning is a little bit like that too. That you almost feel like it started in another realm, and then you just opened up the door, and oh, you know, there's this reality. And I think that I feel like the ending is like that too. As if it almost exists in another realm, and we are just witnessing it, you know, for this period of time, but then we're not.
Yeah, that's perfect, because that's exactly the way I always tell my students, that we don't start and we don't end. We join music for a period of time, and then once we are out of that, music still continues. It's just that it's kind of, you know, you turn on and off like antenna or something. And that's how it felt, you know. It felt like, okay, we turn on the antenna and then they'll turn off, and but music still is there, you know.
You know what I love about that too, Alex? That I just thought of is Backlight, because again, it has that a little of that sense of, as I said, film noir. And what you just said reminded me of the radio a little bit. You know, the sound, you know, of that period a little bit, you know, of just what you said, that it's an antenna and, you know, the radio waves are always there, but sometimes we experience them and sometimes we don't, but they're always there.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Yeah.
Lovely. So I'm going to hand off to Sarah Jordan from Da Capo, who has several more questions for you all.
Some fascinating points about the online experience and learning more about Blacklight as a piece and your conceptualization of it. With that in mind, I wanted to ask, with this experience of working remotely and through applications like Zoom.
I'm having a hard time hearing you, Sarah.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry.
Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, thank you.
Much better.
Okay.
Much better.
Sorry about that. So along these lines, I wanted to ask, with the experience of working with through Zoom and Jamulus and having to work these pieces remotely, has your interpretations of what these pieces are and mean, especially with Blacklight and then the pieces that are going to be performed on Sunday's concert, have those meanings and like the identity of the piece itself changed for you?
That is a really deep question. Let me try to think that one through. I don't think the meaning has changed. I think it might be adjustment in the way it manifests.
Could you take us further into what that means?
Well, I don't know so much about Backlight because I didn't really hear the whole thing, you know, how it worked in Jamulus, but I know that in the trio concert, for example, if we were on stage, we'd have a movement element, not that we're running around the stage, but we usually also have mics, you know, like we have little microphones so that there's it's freer in terms of gesture than what we're able to do in this situation, you know, so that changes everything. And then there are certain orientations. For example, there was one piece that I made that's called Hawk It, and that I usually sing with Katie. And we tried doing it on the Zoom/Jamulus, and we were facing the same direction. And it just didn't work because the Hawk It is always done facing each other. And it's almost as if you see the mouths moving, but you don't even know which voice is doing it. And then when we did it facing forward in that orientation, it just didn't work at all. So that's been very interesting because I think the spatial element and in my work is also very important. You know, the configuration, like that's very important that we face each other. So we couldn't really perform that in this concert. But I'm not sure about the meaning. That I'm a little wondering what you mean by the word meaning.
Where I was going from in the place of that question is if obviously each piece has some sort of meaning when being composed, or as a listener and you hear a piece and meaning comes from that.
But can I just ask you a question about that? Do you mean meaning as in narrative? Because I like to make pieces that it could have many meanings. So, you know, I'm not trying to convey this is what you're supposed to hear and this is what you're supposed to see. I try to make an expansive form that, as Jackie said earlier, people hook in their own ways, and it has so many layers that you can use your own imagination. I mean, that's what I love about music. So that's what I mean about meaning. What do you mean by meaning?
Yeah, so I apologize if I'm not.
No, I'm just wondering.
But yeah, no, basically in that front, because I do understand the point of creating that space to create your own meaning, but more so of just, was there a new meaning created for you through this process?
Well, I'm going to let Allison answer this question. Al, girl.
Well, Jamulus had a lot to do with your what you were thinking of for Anthem. You know, I don't think it was the perfect piece for Jamulus because
you talk about that. Yeah.
Did you want to mention?
Yeah, you tell.
There's a steady pulse in the piano, and then all the other instruments, they are supposed to sound a little off, a little raggedy from the pulse. So it was a perfect match for Jamulus, but I think it became really evident to you that it was the
Yeah,
perfect.
because we had scored it, even in those, if you looked at the score, there was delays in the entrances that I wanted it to be like that. That was the crazy thing, that the score before we worked on Jamulus. And then it seemed like, wow, we can work with this sense of delay in the piece and play with that. So yeah, it did offer another way of looking at something that had already been started before the pandemic, right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's super interesting. So would you say that piece would be more successful in the remote setting versus an in-person setting, or does it just take on a different life in that sense in both?
I think it would be two different lives, because Alan Pearson in the interview that we did said, we can't wait to perform this live. I think it will be two different entities, but hopefully as rich, equally as rich, but just a little bit different in experience. I can't wait to perform Indra's Net live because it's so spatially oriented, so we're all just cannot wait for that. But just what you were saying, so interesting, Sarah, that in fact, because we had the opportunity to work on Jamulus, which we would have never been able to achieve without it, during this period of not being able to really play together, and Zoom. And it's funny, I think I remember at the beginning of the process, I didn't realize that Jamulus was not going to be the kind of delay that Zoom had. And so then I was shocked that we could actually play as much together. And, so it's all those increments, of trying to work with the situation that we're all confronted with.
I find this super fascinating because it really adds to that whole idea that each piece has its own telling, its own life with each performance. And I feel like that's really highlighted with the different applications and modes of performance.
It's true. It's really true.
Yeah, super. That actually leads me to my next question is, what has been additive through this remote process, which we kind of already discussed, but if there's anything else that anyone wants to add about it, I'd love to hear it. Along with that, what are some aspects of in-person performance that you miss the most or wish could be in the particular pieces that you're performing online?
Well, I mean, as I said a number of times, Indra's Net is a piece that's so spatially oriented. Like even the way that I'm thinking musically is spatially. I'm thinking, I can hear, I want the strings over there and I want the other instruments over there. I mean, my idea for Indra's Net is that the orchestra will actually move around and will be in different configurations. And actually the audience will be in different configurations. Sometimes they'll be able to walk through the piece with little groups of instrumentalists, like in almost like little jewels or nodes. And the audience can walk around and hear it very close, and then they can go back to their seats and then hear the overall. So, I'm thinking that way so much in this piece. So I just miss not being able to fulfill that, right now. For me, it's, I have made pieces over the years where I wrote the whole music first and then staged it, like a piece called Politics of Quiet was a little bit like that. I wrote most of the music first and then tried to stage it. But the beauty of something like Indra's Net was that it was synesthetic. It's going back to some of my work that it's really the potential of the piece was to create all the elements, the visual images, film, the movement, gesture, and the spatial configuration simultaneously with the music. So of course I miss it terribly, but I'm just doing my best to keep the impulse going. And if I can just work on the music and get music, section by section with the music, alive, I'm very grateful, in this, so I feel like what I've learned is patience. I've tried to learn is patience. And then Allison pointed out that it's interesting that we work more together. We actually have more time together because of the Zoom. So you can go on with that, Allie, if you want to.
Oh yeah, well, there's a lot of things that you can do through Zoom and through Jamulus that become easy. Like I was commuting 3 hours a day, to work with Meredith. So now it's 11:30 and it's time to hook in, and so that's much more convenient. And the other thing I was thinking of today, when we were listening to the mix for rotation, we were all listening the same way, because this medium forced us to all use headphones and all to listen in the same way, whereas before, one person would be in the mixing studio and wouldn't be right in front of the speaker. And so
That's interesting. That's
the
really, yeah.
you know, this handicap sort of forced a good thing on us that we could continue to use in the
Really
future.
I mean, sound is, even when I've made so many records with ECM and with Manfred Eicher, who has a very particular ear, I always think that sound is one of the hardest things to know whether another person is hearing what you're hearing, to convey it. You know, it's sort of like color. Like I remember when I first met my costume designer, Yocho Yabara, who's Japanese, but he lives in Berlin, and we were trying to get a certain color. And is it cardinal? Is it cerise? You know, I was trying to describe a certain color. Is it rust? And we just didn't know if we were talking about the same thing. And sometimes I think sound is like that, you know, in a recording studio, that Manfred's hearing something different than I am or different than you are. And it's true that it's like we now have we're listening through the same medium, and that's fun. It's really great.
You can make decisions faster, I think,
Yeah.
that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a super interesting point. And I think that adds to the difference of how the performers and the audience experience a piece. And actually, I'd love to ask Melissa specifically about how you experience the piece differently when going through this process with Jamulus and with your colleagues.
Me, Melissa?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I actually didn't. I don't have an experience of playing this piece without Jamulus. I've only experienced it through Jamulus. I was maybe that would be a good question for Jackie, having had both experiences to compare and contrast.
So I was just, can't hear me? Hold on. Can you hear me okay? All right. Very good. Technology, right? So anyways, so Sarah, that's a really great question. You know, for me, and I'll speak not just to Jamulus, but to sort of to online performance. I think one thing that's really been added, you know, has been, at least when I've done things with visual components in the audience, is that I'm able to see the audience's reaction. Like, you know, when I first, you know, premiered Jamulus with what was then Ensemble ACJW, now Ensemble Connect, I didn't have a gauge or sense of what, you know, the audience was thinking. But I could see, let's say, you know, if this performance were to happen virtually, you know, they're needing to be, or there might be an ability to be able to see the audience, how they're responding to the piece, get a sense. I mean, even now with the short little bit of excerpts that we shared, we get audience feedback in the chat, like almost instantaneously. And that's actually really exciting for me. Because for me, I've always felt like sometimes when I'm performing, there's a little bit of a black void.
I have such a different experience, Jackie. I have exactly the opposite experience.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Strange.
Yeah, you know, but that's, you know, Meredith, that's the beauty of experiencing music, is that everybody can have their own experience of it, you know, too, which is so phenomenal. And you know, I think that that's what has really been added. Something that I find to be really similar, actually, between the premiere of the piece, playing this piece live, and rehearsing it via Jamulus, is that just this idea for me as a performer of getting inside the sound of you know, the collaborators that I'm working with, is something that I felt like I was still able to accomplish. So like a good example is that there's a part at the end of the third movement of Backlight where the oboe and flute, you know, are playing in unison. And then there's also a point where we're about a rest off, you know, from each other. And I really still felt like, oh man, like I'm playing with, you know, Melissa. And, you know, it felt very similar to doing it live. So, you know, it's there. I think that there are lots of ways that Jamulus can imitate and also oppose our experience of performing the music. And that's what's been so interesting to me in kind of comparing both experiences.
To me, what I miss, well, first of all, I don't want to look at the chat while I'm performing, like I need to, we need, complete concentration. And so it feels like a little bit like a vacuum, because of the way that I feel it with live performances, there is an energy. You feel it. It may not be that you don't know what people are thinking, but it's more you just feel this energy coming towards you. I always say it's like a figure eight of energy, like an infinity sign. So we're sending the energy out, the energy's coming, and the energy's coming back to us. And the thing that's hard, a little, I guess we just have to get used to it, is no energy is coming back from the screen. What do you think, Al?
I agree with you. I agree with you about that. But there was one moment when this was all starting. I have these other jobs where I play in a temple and a church, and I'm always like facing this way, and then the congregation's out there, and like the first time I couldn't play that way, it was like suddenly I saw all these beautiful faces out there, and it was great. It was great. It was really great the first couple of times, and then it gets kind of flat after a while. But it was really nice seeing everybody's face reacting, in real time. The individual people expressions on individual faces was great, which you don't get in a dark theater.
Looks like Steve has a question.
Yeah, one thing about this Jamulus experience that we've been alluding to, there's a certain kind of extra sensory perception that we all utilize when we play chamber music, and we connect it to the utilizing of our senses, of which visual is a huge part of it. And I was just remembering the very first time I played string quartets as a young teenager, and how inept I was at utilizing my senses, and how simple it is by comparison for me now. And this Jamulus experience, we were deprived of one of our senses. But if we did it regularly, I think our ESP via Jamulus would become more natural. And in a sense, I experienced it to a small extent, because in the third movement, when I had that little solo with Alex playing piano, well, I've played a lot with Alex in the last couple of years, and I kind of know his personality, his vibe, his musicianship, and I felt comfortable doing that. But some of these colleagues, my wonderful colleagues I haven't played with, wish I could play with more frequently. And I just feel like the ESP would kick in, and even without seeing each other, we would have a much more connecting experience. But it was the first time, and a brand new piece as well.
I could jump in also with just while I don't have the experience of having performed or rehearsed Backlight in person and then also in Jamulus, I could make that comparison to other live performances, but then also to other digital or remote performances or collaborations rather. And I think that as so many of my colleagues have mentioned, there is that element missing of our nonverbal communication and the spatial component that we've heard Meredith talking about so much, that we really have become so used to in in-person collaboration. I think the pandemic, it's done so much to bring into focus, so what the things both large and small that we have taken for granted, right? And or just that we were just so used to being able to do, used to being able to rely on, and in collaborating through a platform, through Jamulus specifically, things like the nonverbal communication that we're so used to, and the spatial relating to one another through performance is something that we notice being missing. But then also just a different use of time, even just time in terms of setup and communication, and what we're so automatically used to doing is just different. We've all had to kind of recalibrate our sense of time and space to this platform. And like so many people have mentioned here, now a year into not collaborating in person with other individuals, other musicians. When we first got everything set up and I was able to, for the first time, hear what this was going to sound like, there was almost just like this experience of catharsis and relief that I personally experienced, in how close this sound was to being in person, particularly compared to other digital sounds that I had become used to. A lot of teaching through Zoom, and so there was initially, we were dealing with some little gremlins in terms of static and whatnot, but there was this initial just almost like a release and a relief of feeling that sound, that simultaneous sound with one another, and I really appreciated that. And very much looking forward to being able to do that in person, but then also developing these distance collaborations as well, because I think they're only going to get even better.
I have a quick question for you, Meredith. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh yeah. So I really what you discussed about notation and the challenge of notation really resonated with me. I've actually been working a lot with sort of traditional musicians in Korea, like they're the music that's very has a long history, thousands of years, and very sophisticated. But a lot of times, what's funny is that when it's notated in a paper, it looks ridiculously. I mean, it looks ridiculous. Kind of a lot of whole notes, and of course, it's impossible
I can identify with this 100%. Are you talking about the beautiful drum music, the beautiful Korean drum music?
Just anything, even the wind music or string music. That there's so much like that vibrates, sustain, that moves, shifts, and static, and all of that. That's only can be really passed down through the imitation or just interaction. There's also kind of a not clear boundary between performers and composer. But it sounds like the way that you conceive music and put it down to the paper is very similar, and the Western notation could be very much of a challenge. I often ask my students, what would be the best way to transcribe the music into each other. I mean, the score is one efficient way we develop this system, but ideally we would have this like a brain transplant with the composer and just get the idea and realize a conceptual product into the actual physical space with the sound. I mean, like Chopin, there's no way that the written score is how we play with the time and the subtleties of the phrasing. I like to actually even write down Brahms totally differently for my students, just to make a case for it's not in 3/4, it's not in 3/4 at all in those ways. So what I was curious was, especially because your creative process is so kind of intuitive, it's similar in a way that I see from that Eastern tradition or elsewhere, non-Western sphere. Have you experimented with any of your own notation system, or just way better, more efficient way to work with the performers?
Beautiful. I feel in some ways I do feel so much closer to the folk tradition, and I was going to even say yesterday when Brian and I were talking about notation that if you consider Korean music or Indian music, these are complex musical forms. And I think very much what Juan is saying is that when you see it on the page, it looks so simple, but it's not. It's very complicated. So some of my early work, I did a piece called Our Lady of Light for voice and the wine glass as a drone instrument. It's 16 little pieces. It's like a song cycle. Each piece using a very different quality of the voice. The drone instrument of the glass at a certain point I drink, and then it goes up a half tone, so it goes up during the piece during that song cycle. And what I did was I made more, and I'm sorry I don't have them available to find for you to show you, but I did more graphic notation of what I was doing vocally. It was the only way, like a pictorial kind of notation of what I was doing texturally and vocally and range wise. So that's an alternative. I don't know how we would do that in terms of some of the instrumental music, how you would actually, I mean, something like the second movement of Backlight, maybe a graphic notation of that would be very interesting. I could see that as a pictorial graphic score. But I think what I learned at a certain point was the relativity of score making, of notation, and that blew my mind because, I mean, I was brought up in the Western European tradition, but I've always been so interested in all kinds of music, and there was a certain point where I realized, wow, there's 5 different ways of notating the same thing. There's no absolute at all. So I love the idea that you're saying, let's try to do Brahms in a different way and see I love that idea so that students understand that these are just dots on a page indicating something, but it's not necessarily that they capture the essence of what it is. It's just so that it's a mnemonic device. It's a way of communicating so that people can play together. But then from there, again, what Alex was also saying about the Baroque tradition, it's only like a map. And then what really happens underneath all that.
Alex, you had something to add?
Yes, it's a kind of a question / comment on that idea of notation. And of course, as a pianist, and I mostly play more standard repertoire where I only use the keyboard. So we are talking about I only have half steps. I don't even have I don't have quarter tones and 8 tones. I don't have that. So it's very specific. So notation is a very interesting thing for me in terms of trying to understand what the composer is doing. I had an interesting experience a few years ago recording chamber music by contemporary composer. We were doing the rehearsal, and among the musicians, we played a passage and it didn't feel good. Something wasn't right. And then suddenly we together found a way to express that. I forgot exactly the details. And then we had a chance to play for the composer before the recording. And then we played first as it was written. And then we stopped and we said, listen to this, and this is how we kind of heard the passage. And the composer said, that's exactly what I meant. and the notation wasn't quite the what he wanted. Right. So I love that experience in terms of that the performer sometimes has a different take on this, because as a composer, unless you are a pianist and you are performing a solo piano piece that you composed, you are at the mercy of the performers, right? So yes. So you depend on the performers to find that. And of course, the performers will always try to get to your head. I tell my students, we are going backwards to the head of the composer to see what the composer wanted, and then we bring that now. So what is your relationship with the performers, not only the ones that you have chance to work with, but when you see your piece being performed by someone who you never met before?
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Well, I try while I'm still on this earth to, when people want to play my music, I really try to listen to what they're doing and then give them comments, because it is a kind of transmission. You know, I feel that music is really, and this also goes back to what Juan is talking about. It's like, you know, some music needs to be transmitted from composer to player, you know, or, you know, and so that you know actually what the intention is. And yet, what I like about that way of working, the oral tradition, is I can show a person where it has to be rigorous and where they can play. In other words, how much freedom, how much discipline. Because if for example, I think some of the things that I've experienced is with my piano music, for example, pianists tend to like to do things fast. I mean, and, you know, articulate, you know, how many, you know, and sort of show the technical ability to play fast. And usually it's too fast for my music, you know, so I feel like the tempo thing is very, very important. I mean, Stravinsky was so adamant about that he would write, if he wanted a certain tempo, he'd write 64th notes, so the player had to play the tempo that he was thinking, and it was almost impossible to read, but it was his absolute belief that the tempo is everything. And I do think that's very true of my music. You know, that if you really take the time to ground and let yourself be transparent and really let it not skim across the surface of something, the music has much more depth and much more meaning. So that's something that I like to have a sense of control about a little bit, because it's a guide for the player to know what the world of that piece is. But Alex, you know, my pleasure in my life right now, before I leave this world, is to actually work with the player that's going to play my music and give them feedback and try to help them find their freedom within that.
Okay, looking forward to your solo piano music, more solo piano music.
Oh, we have 2 books of it. If you've ever seen them, I think people really enjoyed playing them.
Yeah, I will.
We had a beautiful concert by Ursula Oppens and Bruce Brubaker, who are wonderful pianists. And again, I think on the surface, the music looks pretty simple. But Ursula said, and who I consider one of the great pianists of all time, said, this is some of the hardest music I've ever played in my life, because you are so exposed. You have to be so honest. You know, you have to really, really put aside, in a sense, it's what we were talking about last night, beginner's mind. In a way, you have to put away everything that you know and see if you can get the world of that piece, and you're very, very, very vulnerable. And that takes a lot of strength and a lot of technique to do that.
Arnaud and Juan had comments to this.
Thank you, Alex, so much.
Yes, actually, I loved your comment, Alex, about this very unique relationship between the performer and the composer. And I think as a performer, we're always very lucky when we have this opportunity to work with a composer. And I love what you said about when it goes both ways. Actually, I think it's really quite wonderful. I was wondering if Jackie and Meredith, you could talk a little bit about it in terms of premiering Backlight. And if Meredith, did you change anything in the score based on the musicians' comments, or was there any kind of communication like, you know, this sounds, or like how and since we were talking about notation before, if there was any kind of back and forth this way, and how the process was?
You want to start, Jackie?
Sure. Well, from my end with the flute part, you know, something that we played around with, Allison, Meredith, and I were talking about was the use of alto flute. So there was one point in the process where Meredith said, "You think you want to try this on alto flute?" And I tried it, and we decided we didn't like it. So I guess we didn't stick with it because it wasn't in the score. But there was a lot of experimentation in this kind of way, you know, and Meredith always asked me, and Allison asked you, does this work for the flute, or what register do you think this would really sing on? Like, you know, in the second movement, there's this really beautiful, you know, flute solo that kind of just like, you know, rises above everything, you know, as flutists do. Kidding. But anyway, so the point is that, you know, it's this beautiful solo. And for the first time, I really felt like you know, and I think that most composers are collaborative in this way, but I really felt like I had like input on how this solo would go, like, you know, and I would try a couple of different registers, you know, for that particular solo with Meredith and Allison, and they would take my feedback to heart. So that was a really, really special part of the process.
Yeah, I love that working. You know, I think that instrumentalists sometimes don't get that chance to give feedback to someone who's making a piece. You know, I think it's not necessarily part of the way that people are trained, and I love that they have their, you know, give a kind of sense and become part of the creative process. I do have a funny story about Backlight. So there's a oboe multiphonic in it, and for Possible Sky, my first orchestral piece, I did do oboe. I had 2 oboes doing multiphonics across the space. So I kind of knew what a oboe multiphonic sounded like, but I remember that the player in the ACJW, I said, could you play some multiphonics, James? And he's a wonderful player. And he played them, and I said, well, how do you think they sound? And he said, heinous. I just remember this. He said heinous, and I thought they sounded great. So about a week later, I said, James, I am going to use the second multiphonic that we worked on in the piece, but please don't play it heinously. And we both really laughed. So I did want to work with the instrumentalist to, again, as a part of the process. And it's not just necessarily that I hadn't done that before. So I kind of knew the different kinds of techniques of each instrument, but I do feel that it just brings this group together. It brings a sense of the people that are playing it being part of this process of creation. So I did do a session. It was more like a workshop, you could say. I did do a session where each instrument, showed me the different extended techniques that they knew on the instrument. And it wasn't necessarily that was going to go into the score, but it just did something where we became part of a group working and playing together. I think it's very important. The process sometimes to me, really makes the difference between whether something's going to come to life or not.
I just wanted to, oh, sorry, Arno. I wanted to apologize for the particular section you brought in, the Clarinet Glissando, because that was score for bass clarinet, and I asked through Jackie that I just wasn't able to coordinate the facilitate instrument trade. I don't own one with the pandemic. I'm staying home most of the
happening to everybody.
And thanks for generously accepting. So I played that on soprano, but that was actually one part from the score in terms of notation that was questionable when I saw that without listening to the performance example. So I had a very different sound in mind from the music, and then I listened to Jackie's performance that she sent to us, and then it was very easy. And then of course after you sung that, just took 2 seconds for you to just sing that couple times. And now I have absolute idea of how to play that. And I think that's so amazing, because when we see the extended technique, I mean, the larger part music itself is true too, but when we see extended technique, the first thing we think about is extended technique. You got to get this, and it's a very awkward place actually in some of them. They're hard if I try to play through the music, but when I try to imitate the sound that you sung, it's very easy. You just have to do it. And it's not extended technique, it's just a technique.
It's like an impulse. It's like an impulse.
Impulse, yeah.
Impulse. And I did sing it. I remember in the rehearsals with the ACJW, I did sing it. And I think we even gave them a little excerpt of me singing it. And we had 2 different clarinet players during that process. And actually they sounded quite different. And I accept that. Like their impulses were a little bit different. The sound that they got was a little different, but I think that as long as the impulse is right, then, and that it does have that sense of authenticity, then, it's almost an emotional thing, then I think it works. And if it's in the same pitch range, in the same range in relationship to the harmony, in other words, I wanted it to be I did not want it to be on the key. I really wanted it to be, between the notes a little bit.
Thank you so much for clarifying.
Microtonal. I wanted it to be a microtonal kind of sound. Thank you so much yourself.
So I'll add into this. I'm curious if you welcome, or this is a question from Tracy, do you welcome interpretations that differ from your own intention for the piece?
Within very small parameters.
Yeah.
It's not a free-for-all at all. But as I say, each of those clarinet players, first of all, their instruments were different. And yeah, they just, again, that's the beautiful thing about making music with real people. Every piece that I make, I prefer to know who's going to play it. And I prefer to, get to know them a little bit in a way. Some composers are the opposite. A very dear friend of mine stated in an interview that he does not care who plays it. And he just wants people to play what's on the page. And as long as they have their chops and they're good players, that's all he cares about. But I was realizing, no, I think for me, it's very different. I really work on the human level. I really like to know the people that are playing it, at least when I'm making a piece. That makes a big difference to me. Allison, do you have any memories of when we were working on that, on the little crying section, in New York?
Yeah, I remember that it was different for each player. And I think that maybe it got transcribed after one person played it and then maybe the other person recorded it. Maybe that was part of the, confusion.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's true.
I'm not sure.
So before Sarah asks if she has other questions, I want to just jump in with this other question that came up in the chat. This is from Jonathan. How can a composer be true to the music they want to write? Any practical ways to confront the negative voices or thoughts that tell you to write differently, and how to discover your true voice as a composer in a time with such eclectic possibilities?
Oh, that's such a good question, Jonathan. Thank you for asking that question, because I do think that it's very difficult to find your own voice in this time when you can listen to anything and everything on the internet, and it's we're just being bombarded by information. In a strange way, the fact that I was very alone, and I wasn't lonely, but I was very alone as a young artist, finding my way with my voice. Not necessarily, there were people that loved it and there were a lot of people that didn't love it, but then, there were always people that really knew what I was doing, especially the jazz musicians gave me a lot of encouragement as a young artist and young composer. But doubt comes up all the time. So I think that is the job of a composer, or any kind of artist or any human being, is that there's only one of you in the universe and you have something to give that nobody else has to give. And part of our job as human beings is to listen to that inner voice that knows that something is authentic and honest for you. Not listen to other people saying what you should do, and what, really try to stay as firm as you can to what your very particular way of doing things, your particular expression is in this lifetime. And that's the discipline of being a composer, or that's the discipline of being an artist. And I think it's the discipline of being a person. It's a full-time job to follow your own path. And it is hard not to listen to what people are saying. And it is very hard to not be influenced by the many, many, many things that are coming at us all the time. I think you have to give yourself time to slow down. Maybe you have to give yourself time to be alone and really hear yourself think. And I think that ultimately you're going to know the difference between something that's coming from that place and something that's coming from what you think you should do. You have to get rid of all those voices of your teachers, the conservatory and the this and the that and the critics. And, you have to endure sometimes the pain of being rejected. I feel like I developed my internal ethical system because of maybe having to go through some of that, the kind of run the gauntlet of viciousness. But ultimately, it really holds you in good stead for a lifetime. And, you just keep on trying to renew your belief, and you're trying to find your own truth. And then the other part of it is the joy of curiosity, trying to be curious, like instead of being hard on yourself, be curious. Who is that voice that's talking to you? And be curious about the world. And, just that sense of experimentation and adventure and discovery is what keeps me going from one day to the next all these years. So it's the fact that you're asking that question already, you're on your path.
Beautiful. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you to our special guests, Allison Sniffin and Meredith Monk. I want to be sure to promote this concert that's happening on Sunday, February 28th at 2 o'clock. This will be Meredith Monk in virtual concert with Katie Gessinger and Allison Sniffin. Please tune in. And for now, we are going to be treated to a very special performance here. We are going to be watching and listening to a recording of Anthem by
That we
Meredith
did on
Monk.
Jamulus.
And I believe it's about 10 minutes long. I would encourage all of you to turn off your screens, put on some headphones.
No, turn on the screen. It's a video as well.
No, I mean, turn off your own screens.
Oh, okay.
Watch the screen on here, turn off your own screen, and tune in with headphones if you can, because there are sonic elements that would be best perceived with headphones. Anthem is inspired by the Buddhist concepts of interdependence and cause and effect. Using what is inherent in the video chat medium, Meredith Monk offers a spacious and expansive composition that encourages us to move forward with an awareness of these relationships, accepting that delay and different senses of time are part of our current reality. Alarm Will Sound has a long history with Meredith Monk, dating back to their 2005 Carnegie Hall performance of her work Night. This performance was the first in Alarm Will Sound's video chat variations and part of the Mizu International Composers Festival. Thank you, Meredith.
Thank
And
you.
to all of you, the end of this performance that you will hear will be the curtains closing on this. So again, thank you to everybody.
Thank you all. Do a little dance here to the rock, though, you know. So.
Kind of wonderful. I need a screenshot of that. Oh, I guess I can't get one. Okay.
Okay, if you're ready, give me a thumbs up.